I'm sorry. Yeah. So last week we kind of, in a way, concluded our first five characters of the Old Testament, starting from Adam, and then we concluded with Sarah and Hagar. So Abraham and Lot, Sarah and Hagar, although we see these two characters in a symbiotic relationship there, but we also find the conflicts, and we see how these conflicts were resolved and what we were able to learn from the characters. So that's what we were able to see. So today, from today onwards, we are going to, for the next couple of weeks, we are going to look at some of the New Testament characters. Although the New Testament, the Bible begins from Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the Gospels, but we are going to look at the early church, because the early church, there is a background to that, because the first writings were the epistles, and the Gospels were written only much later. So we are going to start looking at the early church, characters of the early church. Now, why is the characters of the early church so important for us? Because where the gospel ends and where the early church begins, we need to see the background, we need to see the context, and how these communities, how the early church communities were affected by it. So every character for us is a context. And today we are going to begin with Luke, because Acts is a narration of not just Luke's experience. The book of Acts, as it is titled Acts of the Apostles, is basically a collection of the works of the account of different apostles. And it's not just the 12, it's not just those 12 or who are chosen, but it extends beyond the 12. So the whole concept of discipleship itself is introduced to us in the book of Acts, where it is extending beyond the 12 disciples. It is beyond the Jewish boundaries. It is outside Jerusalem. So that is the context. So the context of the early church is the church outside Jerusalem. Now, of course, book of Acts begins with the historical narration of my dear Theophilus. So in my former book, chapter 1, verse 1, in the first book, O Theophilus, I have dealt with all that Jesus began to do and teach, and until the day that he was taken up, after he had given commands through the Holy Spirit to the apostles whom he had chosen. Acts chapter 1 and 2. Now, these two verses are very important for us. Why? Because for us, we think that Theophilus is a person. Now, it could be a person, we don't know, but it could have been a person, it could have been but it is also a reference to those who love God, Theophile. It could be plural also. So Theophilus, the translation sometimes leads us to think that it is one person, but actually the intention was so that all those who love God, all those who are believing in Christ, they can read this. That's the intention of the book of Acts. So it was written for the early church community. So very clearly, it is a continuation of the gospel narrative. So in the earlier book, in my earlier account, O Theophilus, I have dealt with what all Jesus has. So what is the gospel narrative? It is all that Jesus did, all that Jesus said, until the time that he was taken up to heaven, and the commandment that he has given to go and preach the gospel to the ends of the earth, starting from Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. So in just two verses, the writer of Acts of the Apostles gives us the background and the context of the early church. Now, how do we know it's Luke? Of course, now Gideon is going to give us a historical connection of who the collective people are, who are the we, and who are the people involved. All that he will give. But Luke, we are looking at it through the lens of Luke. And it's not just Luke, through Luke's lens, we are looking at the structure of the early church. We are looking at how the early church functioned, how they influenced each other. And that is why for us, the word Theophilus is a very, very important clue for us, because it is a Greek term. It was written in Greek language, and it means lover of God or one who loves God. And so for us today, Luke, the former things that was written about Christ, led the early church or the early Christians. So we are looking at the early Christians, how the early Christians accepted the gospel, how the early Christians viewed the gospel through their own cultural lens, that is the Greek culture and the Roman culture and the Jewish converts, and we are also going to see how the early church comprised not just of the Jews but also primarily of the in the words of the writings, Gentiles. Today we look at it as Greeks, Jews, and non-Jews, or Greeks and others. So the first two verses of Acts of the Apostles, chapter 1 and 2, gives us the introduction of the ethnicity of the early church. It introduces us to how the gospel began outside Jerusalem and how it spread outside Jerusalem. And that's where, for us, the early church, the Acts of the Apostles, it is important for us to understand the context we are, and that's why the character study is so important. So when we understand Luke, when we understand his character, when we understand who he was, what he was, we are able to understand the message of Luke itself. So to understand the message of Luke, you need to understand the writer first. You need to understand the background of the writer. You need to understand the context of the writer. So just let's keep this in mind, and over to Gideon now.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Pastor, for that introduction. So we are really, we're understanding Theophilus is the only like a singular person, one person that has been written, but it's an eye-opener that, Theophilus may be a plural person to not only to him, but the gospel is written to many others who love God. So it's a good understanding. Moving forward, okay, so today we are going to study about Luke little deeper. That like who is the Luke, and as the pastor has given the introduction. So the Luke was it's like a Greek, the citizen is like born in Antioch, where he's the first convert. He's the first generation Christian, we can say, the first converts, and who decided to is a very good scholar who decided to write the account of Jesus and his ministry to all who love God. So, like Theophilus, it's a plural. If you take it, it's like he is written to many. It's like not one person, but Theophilus. Theophilus also considered to be a prominent person in the Roman government. Uh, some scholars say that
Yeah.
that Theophilus is an advocate who defended Paul in the later stage. But there are so many writings about that. But today we are going to only focus on the Luke. Luke is born in a Greek city. It's like Antioch, where the first Christian church is being established, where the uh, apostles and the other went there to preach the gospel. So outside Jerusalem, this is where Luke was born and accepted Christ, and he was writing the
Your
account.
microphone is even.
He is also Okay, he's also a good scholar. He's a well-learned person. That is why this responsibility has given to him. He's a researcher, scholar. He could able to understand the backgrounds of every topic, and he went in person to research about the person of Jesus Christ and all that he has done, and later started presenting the gospel to the whole world. And this is the only gospel that is written to the people like you and me. It's like Gentiles, because non-Jews, whoever is not a Jew, is considered to be a Gentile. So this gospel, according to see, it's a universal gospel for everyone who can read and understand this gospel. So he has given the full account about the Jesus and his ministry. But he is not the disciple of Jesus. It's like he's not an apostle because he never saw Jesus, because he is born much later than the crucifixion and the resurrection. So he's a and also the Bible talks about that the third gospel and the Acts, as Pastor introduced, written by him. And later we see that the how his involvement in the ministry, not only writing, but also how practically he worked with the Saint Paul and other apostles and to record the facts about how the continuation of Jesus' ministry, not only till the four Gospels, even after that, in the Acts of Apostles, we see the work of the Holy Spirit, the Spirit of Jesus, that leading in the church. So he captures those accounts in detail and writes here. So the author, we see that passes given us the instruction in the Acts and Luke, that he is writing to a most excellent the Theophilus, the Roman dignitary we discussed, and the Luke's gospel is something special, very important for people like us, because his coverage about the Jesus ministry is like how Jesus not only restricted himself to Jews, but how he extended his arm and gone ahead and ministered to uh, non-Jews also. So we see the Luke records the how the gospel has been, Jesus has ministered to non-Jews like Gentiles, and Luke emphasized the importance of women in the Jesus ministry, and because in the Jewish tradition, the women was not given that importance, but how the Luke brings out how the importance is given, how the angelic visit, he records the angelic visits, how the angels visited Elizabeth and Mary and given the first hand the good news to them. So this is the only the Luke is the only author written about the women, and Luke's gospel also talks about the Jesus, welcoming children and blessing them. The Luke records, and Luke gospel something special even more, because we see that uh, not for the holy people, but Jesus has come to the sinners to identify himself with the sinners, tax collectors, sinners, and regardless, that is the contribution of the Luke's gospel. It's like universal. It's not for some community, closed community, or the bounded people, but the gospel is for the everyone. So that is the purpose of his gospel. And so we see that the Luke's gospel covers the more parables than the other three gospels. We see it's like a parable of Samaritan, right? It is Samaritan is not a Jew, but in the Luke's gospel, the parable that Jesus spoke, the Luke has captured that about the parable of Samaritan, how the Samaritan was ministered, to the like a Levite and the priest, how they go off, but how the Samaritan comes and ministers there. That's story is captured there in the Bible. And also the Luke gospel is the one gospel that talks about the prodigal son, how the return of the God's chosen people to God. Once they come, it is not that God pushes everyone out, but it is the inclusive, of the people. So God never rejects anyone, even the people who's gone away. When they come back, like say Samaritans, they have gone out because of the exile, and when they come back, so God's never pushes them back, but he accepts everyone. God never differentiates with anyone, like a caste, color, or creed, or by social status, but God is universal God who accepts everyone. And the Acts of Apostles again attributes, like Luke continues to the story of early church and how it began, how the breaking of the bread, how the people gathered together, continue to worship God, continue to break the bread together, and how the unity it talks about, he talks about the unity of the believers in the Jerusalem and as well as in the Rome and other places. So Luke's contribution to the church, today's church, is it's like invaluable. his historical or theological insights, it's like we cannot comprehend because so vast it is. It's like it's not for one sect of people, but it is for the entire universe, as I shared earlier. The another thing about Luke is the accuracy of the gospel he has written, the trustworthy writing. That is the emphasis is that Jesus came as the Son of Man, and is the emphasis that he brings in that he is accessible to anyone. So it's not that only for certain sect, but here the Luke's account is it's like it's a trustworthy than the other three accounts written. So again, when we talk about Luke, we see that not only just he's a writer writing the gospel to Theophilus, but he's also a part of the ministry that continued. That he also part of sorry Paul's, the missionary journeys. He participated in the Paul's missionary journeys, and he has witnessed, he's an eyewitness of how the God worked miracles in and through the life of Paul while preaching the gospel. How, like in the V passage, we will see that one little later. But, he's a, it's like not just a witness, but he's not a spectator, but he's a participant in all the ministry of Paul during the second and third missionary journey. So coming to the V passages in the Acts of Apostles, it's like the four passages. It's like we have taken to see how this passages talks about whom it talks of. Who is this we? Okay, that's going to be our discussions post this slide. But who is we? So the we passages, we see that how the writer himself he never said that, mentioned his name, but, the passages describe that he is part of the passages, part of the journey that Paul's, undertaken. So the Acts chapter 16, verses 10 to 17, the V passage, first passage talks about the Paul, receives vision, to go to, Philippi, and how he travels the journey is to tell the gospel to the people there. So in the second passage, we see that chapter 25 to 15, the how the Paul and his companions travels from Troas to Miletus, the missionary journeys, where the Luke is part of this. And the Acts chapter 21, verse 1 to 18, the Paul and his companion, how the Luke is journeying with them, in the missionary journey. And finally, we see chapter 27, verse 1 to 28, chapter 28, 16. We see that the Paul's last journey from the journey to Rome, and is while he sails, while how the shipwreck happened, and how they halted in Malta, and received the hospitality of the Gentiles there, and how again they went back, sailed back to Rome. So these are all the important, the passages, the V passages in the V passage that Luke identified himself in this. He gives clue that he was also part of it, unless until it is specifically spoken about him. So in this is all about the account of the Luke, and there is many more things to be shared, but due to the time constraint, I give it to Pastor for the questions. Now over to you all. We can start. Unmute and discuss about the passages we discussed.
So friends, what I would recommend is just if we can log out, I will end the meeting now because it will end in 40 minutes. So it's almost 40 minutes now since the meeting has started. So I would recommend that I will end the meeting now, and please rejoin the meeting with the same ID, because otherwise it will so on. Okay, so please rejoin again. I'm going to end the meeting.